Caitlin, am I sharing my screen? Am I?
Yes, you
Okay,
are.
good.
Yes.
I'm glad that you started recording right as the like awkward and tech thing is. And just to confirm, we have you guys are here for an hour. So we have
Yes,
so I should aim for 50 minutes question and answer.
that would be great.
Awesome. Well, first off, this is a discussion, so feel free to like chime in. But talking to Caitlin, she thought it'd be helpful to hear kind of a case study of what is a people-powered approach to campaigning? Like, what is that? What does it mean? What are the different aspects of it? And then talk a little bit about the structure of how, you can kind of figure that out. And then, we'll open it up for questions. And we've already done the welcome introductions. I'm going to go through a case study, and then I really want to drill into the concept of power, because all change happens, like all change is rooted in power dynamics. And so I want to dig into that a little bit and how power plays a role in not only the outcome of your campaigns, but in developing the strategy. So first off, I'm going to bring you back almost a decade ago to a campaign I led at Oceana, which I think has taken a complicated view on offshore wind, which I don't agree with, and we'll get to some of the best practices with advocacy later on. You never, operate with permanent friends or permanent foes on a particular issue. But I worked at Oceana and I led their climate and energy program, which entailed stopping the expansion of offshore drilling at the time in just the Atlantic, and promoting offshore wind. And so, by 2015, the Obama administration had actually like opened and set in motion that we were going to continue to explore and expand drilling in the Atlantic, right? Like this complicated process, regulatory, that you don't need to know, that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management conducts to decide when and where you drill, was like started. And in the history of the agencies, there's never been a point where you offer up the Atlantic or some sort of planning area and take the entire thing out. Usually what they do is they look at a huge swath and then they start taking chunks out like Swiss cheese, depending on the different interests or environmental factors that go into it. So this is where we were. I'm going to skip this video just in the interest of time, but this is a very inspirational. Yay, we won. We won video. But I mean, now it's kind of coming back, but in 2008, right, drill baby drill got popularized. Like it was equated with job creation, economic prosperity. It became, the McCain Palin slogan. So there was a huge, forward momentum and political pressure to open up drilling by the electorate. And our opposition, right, we were opposed to offshore oil and drilling, and they really capitalized that, and also were like feeding those talking points. They focused on job creation, economic stimulation, revenue for beach renourishment, which was a big issue in the Atlantic. They wanted to do the testing, the seismic air gun blasting to search for oil and gas, and they really wanted to move away with the framing or even reminding people about the BP disaster. Which they like to call as the Macondo incident that killed 11 people and caused countless, environmental degradations in the Gulf. And Ocean and other green groups were really at the time focused on the impacts to animals, right? Like, I'm a scuba diver, I have my own values and set of values that, like, yes, I actually do care about whales and dolphins, but the reality is that not everyone cares about whales and dolphins and sea turtles and enough to actually try to engage on issues and make change. So where we started was around the impacts of exploration in and of itself being bad for the environment, and it wasn't needed because we needed to make the case that we didn't even need drilling to begin with. And so to help kind of reframe the issue so that we could bring in new constituencies that didn't just care about whales and dolphins, we needed to refute, like, one, neutralize our opposition's talking points about jobs and economic development, right? And we also needed to address the issue that we always got back being like, well, we need energy, like we still drive a gas car, right? Like, so there's these typical arguments that we get in the climate and energy space all the time. And so we needed to address that and create framing that gave us a proactive message to reach out to people on why not to do something bad like drilling and why we should be supporting things like offshore wind. And so in 2015, we released the report Offshore Energy by the Numbers, and we used industry numbers, and we looked at the same area, like how much energy and how many jobs can we get from offshore drilling versus offshore wind. We're super conservative, got peer reviewed, right? Airtight facts and figures. And conservatively, we found that offshore wind would create twice as many jobs. It would create twice as much energy. It would protect the 1.4 million jobs that currently depend on ocean energy, ocean ecosystems. It is 7:30. A long day. And it protects the $95 billion GDP. And this doesn't even include the New England, because from the earlier map, the area of exploration under the Obama administration was like the tip of New Jersey, Cape May, New Jersey to Cape Canaveral, Florida. So, you know, if you expand that beyond, these numbers would even be greater. And, you know, the reason why we needed to do that and to frame an issue to build power is because, like, we had very little power. We were, you know, a few green groups in DC, a few local groups that were like, I'm kind of worried about that, but that's a DC decision. And Big Oil, who had been like systematically running a campaign and building power to open up the Atlantic. So after the BP disaster, the Obama administration, because of the disaster, put a pause on all offshore drilling. And so Big Oil at that, like, since that time, was creating governors of coalitions and creating, you know, different interest groups to try to engage and like ask for those jobs. So there was a huge power imbalance on the time, and that's what we ended up needing to address. And we, again, you know, it's all over the region, but let me just pull out one of the states to kind of give you a you know, a crisper story. But North Carolina was one of a critical state in this fight. And at the time, the governor, Pat McCrory, he had used to work for, you know, a very fossil fuel friendly Duke Energy, a utility and utility generator. He became the champion, or, you know, one of the champions for this issue, who hosted the Outer Continental Shelf Governors Coalition, right? They built coalitions of decision makers and different industries, Americans for Prosperity, Vets for Energy, right? Like all these different names, to advocate and lobby the Obama administration to open it up. Oh, and the Consumer Energy Alliance. And so they had a ton of power. And again, we were, you know, a small group in DC without even like a North Carolina presence. And so we did have an organizer in North Carolina, and we did get wind of a letter that Mayor Dean Lambert, so this is Curry Beach on this map. It's a small town. It's like 1,200 year-round residents. It balloons because of tourism in the summer. But, you know, the industry was organizing, and they were talking to their political allies and encouraging them to weigh in to open up the Atlantic. And that included them reaching Dean Lambeth, who's this guy on the right. And, you know, not only did he submit this letter, you don't have to read it, but it's basically saying we want offshore drilling and sending it to the Bureau of Energy Management. But he didn't even take the time to like take off or like copy and paste it without the logo of the other organization, America's Energy Forum. And he signed it as mayor, which had been, you know, a topic of discussion for the town, being like, look, you can sign on to whatever you want as an individual, but if you're signing as the mayor or a council member of the town, then you need to provide opportunity for other council members and the public to weigh in. He did not do that. We were able to get a copy of the letter that he signed and you know, rabble rouse, and got, you know, a ton of people to show up to this meeting and to tell the council what they thought. Oh, and the other woman was our champion, Emily Swearingen, who we were working on to introduce a resolution to oppose seismic airgun blasting and developing offshore drilling because of the harm. And so hopefully, can you hear this? I might need to share it with audio.
No sound yet.
Can you hear that?
No.
Pardon.
Yeah, I think if you reshare and click share sound,
I forgot to hit the button.
I know. I wish they'd make that one more obvious.
Well, and you're in Zoom and Teams and Google, right? Like in any particular day. So they're all different. Okay, let's try. Take two.
Yep. Oops.
We are all here tonight to tell you you were wrong.
I am only 9, but I hope you will give me a chance and hear what I have to say. I hope that you will think again about seismic testing off our coast. I love the ocean. Some things just shouldn't be for sale.
I respect if you support offshore drilling and seismic testing. I completely respect that. But as an elected representative, I believe you're there to represent your people. And I think the people have made their voice pretty clear tonight.
Seismic air gun testing is not going to bring jobs to this area. If anything, it's going to take jobs away.
The cost to this community is simply too great to trade seismic testing for the false hope of future revenues.
I really can't see how this is going to benefit us.
I wonder who they could be. Shocker.
We have a real problem along the East Coast for beach renourishment. The claims that are made by some are just purely unfounded. We respect your opinions, but unfortunately you're just flat wrong. Seismic testing is a process towards offshore exploration. Offshore exploration has the ability to provide royalties, which then can flow through for beach renourishment.
What kind of royalties are the states and the towns on the East Coast now legally allowed to receive?
You cannot receive any, which is why you need to have your voice heard to actually receive funds for this process.
Your companies, do you do any seismic testing off the coast of California? They don't, do they?
No.
Is it illegal to do seismic testing off the coast of California?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Emily is like one of the coolest grandmothers I've ever known. But this is a small town, you know, typically 5, maybe 8 people come from the public attend these meetings outside of the council members and staff and or any of the speakers on a particular event. And it was standing room only and overflow. So there was like 300, 400 people that turned out to this council meeting to address this issue. And oops. What do you guys think happened? So we had Emily Swearingen, who was like anti-drilling, pro, you know, on our side. We had the mayor, and then we had 2 other Republicans and 2 Democrats, and the mayor breaks the tie if there is a tie. What do you guys think? Did we win? Did we get what we wanted or not?
Meg saying yes.
Any no's? We got a couple, I see a couple head shakes, yes. Okay, you're wrong.
Oh no.
We, you know, 2 votes no, 2 votes yes, mayor broke the tie. But we knew that was going to happen, or that was a very likely possibility. But we addressed that as a tactic, and we knew that this was going to be a way to fail forward. So like, how is it that you can win when you lose? And so other people in the audience that we made sure to be there were Carolina Beach representatives and council members. So they could see what the issue is about, what people were talking about. And without fanfare, the very next day, or not next day, next council meeting, which was, you know, in a week or the next month for Carolina Beach, which was like 2 miles up the road, they passed a resolution opposing seismic airgun blasting, right? They listened, they saw like what the issues were. They're, representing their people's self-interest. We encouraged them to do so. And that was the first resolution. The resolutions was a tactic of ours to galvanize communities, create urgency so that they understood that the decisions about whether or not you're going to drill or not, whether or not you're going to get revenue, which they were desperate for beach nourishment as tourism towns, were true or false, were actually happening now in DC without fanfare, but they needed to know about it in order to understand how and when to engage, to have their voices heard. And so that's what we did. And we had to produce scale and replicability. We had 4 organizers, a small DC staff, and again, created partnerships with nonprofits, outdoor industries, small businesses. And we went town by town and strategically targeted, red and purple towns along the coast before touching the blue ones. Because if we had 10 resolutions in blue cities, it would be harder to make that case in Charleston, in Georgetown, South Carolina, in like deeper red states. So we knew we were going to get them. We ended with, DC later, like the other cities. We also focused on port cities where our argument about job creation was quite honestly weaker, right? Like the port cities, the areas that had ports that could handle the industrialization of oil refineries and bringing them on board and all of that, they actually would have indirect job growth much more so than all of these other cities, which are kind of make-believe benefits that would happen. And so we had a strategy about when we go into where and who were the right messengers and all of that. But we went town by town, and this is a list of all the towns that passed resolutions along the coast during this time period. And we were using, those local elected officials to build enough power to get other constituencies to be able to then flip congressional members and get enough congressional members to flip senators and governors and ultimately the president. I wonder, oh, good. Oh, I do have animation. So, over time, this is what we were trying to do with this tactic, was building power. And we wanted to be able to move people that oppose the issue or weren't as powerful, or, over to be supporting the issue and also increase their power over the issue. And so we created and partnered, we helped create and we created the enabling conditions for a business alliance to form around this issue. We hosted I don't know what we called it, a conference of business interests all along the coast to talk about the issue, what was at stake for them. Again, these are all tourism industries. They're not going to benefit from any of this, and they're the ones driving the economies in these coastal towns. And they ultimately decided to create the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast. It created their own C3 website, representing tens of thousands of businesses, 500,000 commercial fishing families. We engage with the Mid and South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, which you probably work with some, and for at least the New England one. We garnered bipartisan support at the local, state, and federal level. Our champion on the Republican side was Mark Sanford when he wasn't hiking in the Appalachians. But I mean, when we passed, I think we passed 7 resolutions in his district, and he picked up the phone and called our organizer and told her, she's like, and after 7, he decided to come out and oppose seismic airgun blasting, and he did a press conference with us and other partners to update his position, or just to have his position on seismic airgun blasting. And he said he was opposed to it. And that very day of making that announcement and getting some news coverage around it, he got calls from donors, and he ultimately called our organizer and was like, oh, that cost me $40,000, right? Like there was a direct cause and effect in terms of how much, money is influencing. But in this case, he actually was representing the people because he wanted to get reelected, and money can help influence people to vote, but they aren't all ultimately votes themselves. And we created a movement. And this is what it looked like.
This is all a political ploy, I can tell you, to go out there and start drilling.
Listen to people on the coast who are making their voices heard consistently on this, not just here, but in Florida, in Georgia, in North Carolina.
There's a fight going on. The people are united in saying that we don't want this, and the governors and Washington aren't listening.
What we're saying to the federal government, quite simply, is don't open this door. Keep this door shut.
If they do find oil, they're going to drill. And we're going to have oil rigs off our coastline. We are not going to accept this. We are not going to allow them to search for oil, find oil, and drill off our coastline.
And this was a video that we constantly had to update because we'd get more resolutions, we get more businesses, right? Like some of those numbers. But we were able to kind of create this momentum around an issue and the value set of all coastal communities, and giving them lots of reasons to want to be opposed to offshore drilling and seismic blasting. And I am remiss for not mentioning this at the top of the call, but I'm always conflicted when I'm giving these types of case studies and presentations of whether to like use a defensive, stop something bad campaign versus a start something good campaign. Because whenever I do the stop something bad, people are like, yeah, but it's different when you're trying to start something good. And if I do the start something good, people are like, well, it's different because that was, start something good. They're the same. They're the same. Like the fundamentals are the same for either approach or either issue. And elections matter, right? Like if you're going to build all this momentum, like we also have to hold people accountable, right? So looking back on Curry Beach, a couple of years later, they were up for re-election, right? Like the Mayor Lambeth was up for re-election, and Emily Swearinger in the right decided to run against him, and she won, right? Like this was the issue. I mean, we don't, like Oceana isn't a C4, so we did not do any of the electioneering, but we became so synonymous with the community in terms of like representing their interests when it comes to offshore energy that they're wearing, Oceana shirts. So he won. At the same time, there was a governor's race going, and McCrory, who was the poster boy of pro oil, he wrote a letter to Bureau of Ocean Energy Management giving public comment his comments on offshore wind concerns. And does anyone have just a wild guess of what one of his concerns was with offshore wind? You're literally never going to guess, or I'd be very impressed if you could. Oil spills. He was concerned about the oil spills for like greasing the gears or something. It was so absurd. I'm just like remembering this, but yeah, I ended up like writing an op-ed to one of the papers of just like how absurd it was. And he was absurd on a few different issues at this time. So, offshore drilling you can't necessarily like it was the one deciding factor for a statewide race, but it absolutely was a factor on the coastal communities that were mobilized around this issue. And we know because Charleston, South Carolina did a split ticket. They voted for a Democrat for the first time in 30 years because of offshore drilling in the congressional race. So anyway, so Pat McCrory loses, a presidential hopeful at one time, political career, not just because of offshore drilling. My North Carolina Republican conservative colleagues likes to remind me about his bathroom bills, but it was one of the top issues that influenced it. And then Roy Coper, who was, supportive of our interests, took power. And all of a sudden, instead of opposing, McCrory and, all of these arguments, our talking points are now showing up in fact sheets around like the state governor and their offices and they're citing the coastal business oppositions, the leaders that are opposing it, the communities that are opposed to it. They're talking about the jobs, the marine life, right? Like all of the information that we've been gathering and that we've been, getting in resolutions now, right? Like fake it till you make it. You actually keep saying it until it's real. And that's a thing. It happens. And so now not only did we have a champion, but he was a huge resource in, continuing to support that. And in January, Elizabeth Swearingen, the newly elected mayor of Curry Beach, along with dozens, if not hundreds, I couldn't keep track of other elected officials that weighed in on this game, took their new role. And the first thing she did in her first town meeting was introduce a resolution to oppose offshore drilling and seismic amber blasting, and it passed unanimously. And it also happened to be the number of 100s, which is, as a campaigner, is just like so clean, right? Like 100, just like came first circle, couldn't have planned it better ourselves. But just that was how the timing, and it made international news. So I think this one on the right is from The Guardian. I cut the clip of it, but from very local state, no one was paying attention to it, in the, nationally or internationally, that we built this story, right? Like we built this movement that started in this town of 1200 that went up and down the coast, went, circled back and passed the 100th resolution. And we did that because, we were able to find an effective message that could bring new people in and build power. We defined the problem. We connected it to people's self-interest. We addressed reasons why to support it or why not. We created that urgency, and we were really clear and concise. So we moved from just a marine life, which would only mobilize and get a certain subset of the constituents engaged, to understanding the dangers and risk around drilling, to be creating a better vision for the energy economy and job creation than what we have now or what's being presented. And ultimately we won, right? Obama, you haven't seen the drilling, a reverse course on drilling. And we changed those power dynamics so that we built our power and reduced their power. And we were able to shift that in order to get the administration to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do. And again, elections matter. And later Trump was elected and we had to start it all over again. And he wanted, I don't know if you guys remember, but in the first 100 days, right, he was drilled, baby, drill. We need to expand, expand our footprint, energy dominance, right? All of those things. And offshore drilling was a huge, focus point for him. And he proposed opening up all the waters. What do you think we thought when this was happening? Was this a good thing or a bad thing that he was opening up not only the Atlantic, like the mid and South Atlantic, but the North Atlantic, all, other additional pieces of the Gulf and the in West Coast and other pieces of Alaska? Was that a good thing for our campaign or a bad thing?
A good thing.
Why do you say that?
Well, it's not a good thing he's suggesting this, but that it energized your campaign.
Good. Anyone else? Meg is shaking her head, meaning no, nothing else, or no?
Well, it seems like it would be a bad thing because you had already won your campaign and now you had to restart on a national level.
Yeah, you're both right. So on one hand, we're like, we did not build enough power to make this an election issue at the national level because it was a regional issue. And so, we have to fight this again. But at a strategic level, by making the problem bigger, he made the solution bigger and made our campaign continue to be replicated. If I was evil and I was, consulting for these guys, I would have said, you want to do, like, I do the Swiss cheese. I was like, you want to lease here, here, and here, right? Like, like where the actual reserves and interests are, because it's a whole lot harder to get someone to care about someplace in Curry Beach, in Nebraska, in California, in what, right? Like in all of these other places around the country, if it's just really targeted. But by saying blanketly, like, okay, we're gonna open all of this stuff, all of a sudden aligning people's self-interest in this issue was a lot easier. So here it is. On the left, you have everywhere he was opening up these little, like, I don't know, beigeish, peachy colors. And on the right, this is what we kept doing. We were passing resolutions. We were getting sign-on letters. We were getting businesses. And so we were just able to like expand that work, which also reflected in like Congress, right? Because a lot of our Congress people are on the coast, and right, we were able to kind of like shift those dynamics. And ultimately, the Republicans got what they wanted. They'd be like, hey, Trump, can you take out Florida or take out this state? And so he did, right, for his own self-interest. And then other states were like, well, what about us? And da, da, da. And then it became election time again. And it was so politically toxic that he reversed all plans for expansion of offshore drilling in either both the Atlantic and the in all those regions. This is a very complex visual of like all the steps it takes to do offshore drilling, leasing, and permitting. It's really not relevant. What's relevant is that like each of these little dots provided us an opportunity to build and express our power, right? So we were starting to build, our power. Here's this many resolutions or this. And over time, when we had these public comment periods, we brought the mayors up to the to DC to make sure they were talking to the decision makers. They were talking in state capitals, in council meetings already. But these provided opportunities to mobilize, create urgency. Hey, you got to speak up now or forever hold your peace, because this is the public comment period, or this is when the decision is going to be made, and express it to the people that ultimately had the ability to make those decisions. And so over time, right, like in 2014, we had less power. So our little ball on the bottom, right, if you remember that image, we had less power and resources than our opposition. Under the Obama administration, we ended up being able to create strategic leverage such that we got what we want, but we really didn't build enough power to make it durable. But under the Trump administration, we continued to build, and we not only won the campaign, but like our bubble got bigger, right? Now we're talking about permanent protections. We're codifying into law in Congress. Like this issue isn't just hey, every 5 years we're making a plan, but actually over time making it permanent. And we used what we had to get what we want, right? We did not have access to the president. If we had only focused on the president to try to get him to do the right thing, we would have never won under Trump, and we would be seeing development going on right now. So we started, at the local elected officials, and we flipped enough of them to get state representatives, to get flip them to get congressional representatives, to governors, to the agency and the president. Oops, I'm going the wrong way.
Claire, could you say some more about the point of sort of not working with people who already agree with you? And like, do you go for those? How do you know who's sort of persuadable after that?
So we'll get that a little bit more. Well, actually here, it's actually this one. So here's some lesson learned that actually answer your question. Is it on this one? The smoke them out. We'll get to it. Okay, so one, industry is never well prepared to address power building campaigns, right? They are focused on politicians and business leaders because they are grass tops. They have a lot of power. They actually don't believe in like the democratization of power, and they don't believe that like you can join together to build your own power. So they focus on politicians. They focus on McCrory. They focused on like fossil fuel interests. And they could get their politicians to remain quiet and then kill your initiative through the process. And so we had to master the process. That was that complex grid. or we were going to die them out. We'd find out too late if they made the wrong decision. And we had to get the voters to hold them accountable in terms of like Emily Swearingen, right? Like this was an electoral issue, or we had to smoke them out, right? So if we didn't make a big fuss about Dean Lambeth and countless other decision makers, no one would know to not vote for them anymore, that they were not acting in the interests of the people. And so sometimes we had to like create the conditions of like, who's with us and who is against us, to your point, or to your question, Caitlin, right? Like, who is movable? Sometimes you don't know, and you actually have to run some sort of structure test to figure that out. You can figure out who's with you, who's really against you, and then like, who is that in that middle, that middle area that you really want to focus on. You don't need to focus on the people that already agree with you. You need to harness their energy and their resources to help you get to the people that are movable. If we were enough, we wouldn't be in the predicament we are today when it comes to climate. I started working in climate 20 some years ago, and I was like, I'll do this for 10 years. And then like, once this is good, like I'm going to go do like change careers and probably go crafting. And I was wrong. I was naive. There's a ton more work to do, but ideally, you need to like think about like winning for the long term. And then power building campaigns need and should take advantage of their nimbleness to shift tactics, often and without warning. Count on companies and organizations to be slow to react because of their levels of bureaucracy. The seismic airgun companies were caught flat-footed. They were not ready for an advocacy campaign. They literally did not know how to respond. And as a result of us going up the food chains, we were able to stop the activity before we had to deal with the collective force of the industry. So we built all that power under Obama administration before Trump got involved. And then he had the collective support of the industry, right? So had we not kind of built that foundation, we wouldn't have been able to support those efforts. And we need to fill your list of supporters the way that Marvel Comics filled their list of superheroes, each with their unique superpower. Again, kind of back to your point around Caitlin, that yes, like, one superhero can be like the environmentalists or the climate people, but who is that superhero for the small businesses, the jobs? Like, what are these other angles? There's a lot of reasons why to support offshore wind. There's a lot of reasons why we need to deal with climate change, but not everyone agrees with the same reasons we might. So it's our job to figure out who is that superhero that is the right messenger or has that right skill set that can kind of bring that over the goalpost. Let me pause there before I go into like the theory of how did we figure out this strategy. Any questions or reflections on that case study? Hopefully I'm not just boring everyone or keeping them from their dinner. Okay, so why do we write, like, what is a campaign? Like an issue campaign, right? We have an ask, we identify our decision makers, we have a strategy to get our ask met, we build power and we win or lose. Repeat, 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 repeat. If we're building a movement over time and actually trying to solve things like climate change, which is, huge. And, have you heard, I've talked about power a lot, but it's really important to understand the difference between education, influence, and power. Education is really valuable to inform and engage, whether it's either informing and engaging in your decision makers or the people that you need to get on your side, like in the case study, the small businesses that we need to engage and the fishery council members and the mayors that needed to weigh in. But ultimately, education is a tactic, right? Like, we're not going to win with education alone. Like, if education was enough, again, we wouldn't be working on climate change, because it would have been like, we have more scientific evidence about climate change than like anything. If you've ever read those IPCC reports, and look where we are. And then influence is being able to ask for something, right? So like, I'm from DC, as is Caitlin's husband, lobbyists peddle in their ability to influence, but they actually can't get shit done. Right? They can access someone to ask someone to do something. So all things being equal, someone saying, hey, support this bill or that, but whatever, sure. But if you actually if that was enough, great, then you don't need a campaign, one. And two, we know that it's actually not enough to change the fundamental economic structures around the fossil fuel industry to create the enabling conditions and the economic opportunity for renewables. And so exercising influence does not build power, and it can sometimes do the opposite, because sometimes a lot of lobbyists are like, oh, don't talk to them, I'll handle them or whatever. But if you can keep getting meetings with the same people over and over, but they're still not doing the thing you want them to do, like, why do you care that you're meeting with them? Hold them accountable, right? Smoke them out, make sure their communities know about them, get them to change positions like we did with Stanford, or, unelect them. And power ultimately is the ability to get someone to do something that otherwise wouldn't do. Period. That's all, right? In Spanish, it's the word poder, which directly translates into to be able to, right? Like, if you are able to do something, it's really, do you have the power to do it? And it only exists in relationships to others. And that goes back to that little, like that diagram of, the money and resources you have versus they have. So power doesn't just exist like in and of itself. It's related to the other thing, or the other, the other entities that care about that specific issue. And so where does it come from? It comes from organized people, organized money, and organized information. I have no idea why they're all number ones, but it's true. There's no particular order. These are all, important, tasks, but I actually would like organized people. We still live in a democracy for now. And that is the most powerful, because we have a vote. Organized money can help us get people elected, or, turn them out to vote, but isn't power in and of itself. And organized information, mass media, policies, right? Like, that's the, to get people to oriented around these policies, to care or not care, to engage or not engage. And the way that we're exercising it, there's a few different ways, right? Coercion, like, bad, don't do that, right? Lose their job, right? Some sort of care, stick. Reward, convincing someone why it's worthwhile to do what it is, like whatever it is, right? So Stanford, he saw that his constituents really cared about it. He wanted to get reelected. He's like, I see that the return on the investment of siding on this issue is more beneficial than the $40,000 of campaign contributions. And influence, getting others to want what you want them to do, right? So if I'm a decision maker and I don't really care about a certain issue, but like all my friends care about it, like, oh, maybe I do want it, right? Like, you can, like, they might have power and influence over me to make a decision. And there's different forms of power, and it's related to the type of campaign. So we use campaigns a lot, but there are different ones. So the ones I've been talking about again are like issue campaigns, but there's corporate campaigns, and like the power that matters is your ability to affect profits versus your ability to get votes. Legal is your ability to enforce laws. Disruptive could be like a strike, right? To like stop things from functioning. Political is your ability to get someone elected or not elected. So there are different types of campaigns and the forms of power that matter for them. And, this is one of my favorite graphs, but like, this is what power dynamics look like, right? Like, when there is something wrong, which we know in the climate space, there is a power imbalance around fossil fuel industries and others. And our power and resources is smaller than that of our opponents. And strategy is about figuring out how do we turn what we have into what we need to get what we want. And so not only do we need to figure out what that strategic leverage was, and the other example was like getting the local elected officials and the businesses to express their support, but ultimately we also want to grow our bubble so it's durable over time. And power also only exists within context, right? Like, who actually wins with a decision? Who decides, like, who makes that agenda and decides, and then who benefits and loses? And although I've already done campaigning well before I had a kid, my daughter has taught me this in like such vivid ways on a daily basis of what power dynamics are. She's 4 years old, similar to Caitlin's little one, and she is like a sugarholic, right? Any chance she's gonna be a great lobbyist, but hopefully she'll be a strategist like her mom. She is clear. She's on message. Can I have some chocolate? She asks often, early and often, right? She's always like calculating how to get some more chocolate. And so who has the power to to give her what she wants in this situation? Me. And so all the time I'm arguing with her or like negotiating down from like this amount to this amount for whatever, doing whatever she's supposed to do. But then let's talk about structure. Who brings the chocolate and the sugar into the house? Caitlin, you should know this one.
Your husband.
Greg. He cannot say no to that girl. I just don't want the chocolate in the house where you don't have to, negotiate, and like she doesn't have to run these series of campaigns. I actually target my husband for structural change to like stop bringing sugar in the office. I lost that campaign until I had to do an outside game, and I got a third party validator in the form of $1,000 dentist bill from having cavities. And now we are reducing the amount of sugar that we have in the house. Still a work in progress, but like that is the structural change, right? And I'm sure we all have those in different, in our own lives, but it doesn't have to be this like amorphous, impossible thing to figure out, right? Like we actually do this all the time. We just don't talk about it, which is why sometimes it's hard to conceive. And so when you're building out a strategy, it comes down to how much power do you have? How much power do you need to win? And then what's your plan to build that power? And there's a framework. I love the Midwest Academy Organized for Social Change, like strategy chart framework. And I lift a lot of inspiration from them, but ultimately it's about asking the right questions in the right order. And so, ultimately, what is your long-term goal? What is your long-term vision? So for Oceana with offshore drilling, it was right, like stopping climate change. Our intermediate goal was to stop the expansion of offshore drilling in the Atlantic. And our short-term goal was to get the Atlantic out of the 5-year plan and promote offshore wind, right? And delay seismic air gun blasting. So there's going to be a ton of short-term steps to get our intermediate goal. There's going to be a ton of intermediate steps to ultimately make a movement and accomplish our long-term goals. But you also have to make sure that you're right-sizing your campaign, right? We didn't start with the president because like we didn't have any power. So we were just, what are we going to do? Like that would matter. So we really had to take inventory of like, what are our resources, what tools, expertise, partnerships, what is it that we have now, or what could we build by when? What types of things as an organization did we want to gain from running this campaign so that we were stronger this time a year from now, 2 years from now, from 3 years from now? So again, the offshore drilling, like we ballooned our allies, our partners, our expertise, our networks, our like if we hadn't done all the organizational gain building when under Obama, we would have never won under Trump. And then we had to understand the internal, external considerations, like where are there tensions, conflicts? Are they internal organizationally? Are they external? Like how are we going to address it? You can't just pretend there's not a problem. That's a recipe to fail. And we were very clear on who our targets were, like who ultimately could give us what we want for the offshore drilling plan. It was Obama, right? It was his administration. But who influences that plans are the tier 2 targets. So a person that has power, influence over your tier 1. So that was his agency heads. That was, tier 2 governors. Didn't have them yet. Had to go down to state and local elected officials. Didn't have them yet. Had to go down to the local elected officials. And then we built back up, if you remember that pyramid. And when they're elected, we know the power analysis. It's, here's the cheat sheet. They care about votes to get elected or reelected, money to help them get elected and reelected, or their public image to help them get elected or reelected. And we see the public image in beautiful display in the gubernatorial race in North Carolina yet again. And you have to then do your power analysis. The opponents are never amorphous, right? Like you need names, like who are the organizations, who runs those organizations, right? You need to actually draft out who are your opponents, who are your constituents, who could join 350, right? Like who could actually join and become members and help you execute your campaign goals and strategies. Who are allies? Who are the people that can partner with 350 but aren't necessarily your allies? So with Oceana, the business community didn't join Oceana, right? But they were allies to advocate for that. And then partners are your coalition partners. Like who is the thought leadership? Who is driving the strategy like listening, getting input from others and helping to craft that on a regular basis. And ultimately, tactics are your ability to demonstrate the power that you've built. And there's 3 ways to do it. You either have a lot of people that care about it. You have a lot of people in one place that shows that you deeply care about it, because those translate into votes. And a lot of people isn't a number for a reason, right? A lot of people in DC for, a mobilization is hundreds of thousands, if not millions. A lot of people in Curry Beach is 20, right? Like, so a lot of people depends on the context in which you're operating. More is not always more. You don't always need that. And then you really need to get the right people meeting face to face with your target. So like, who are those tier 2 targets? And I'm making sure they're talking to the ultimate decision makers. And the fundamentals of winning campaigns is like building power. Every campaign comes down to power. You got to frame your issue to build power and not just sing to the choir, right? If we were enough, I've been working on these issues for decades. If we were enough, we would have won by now. So it's not enough, unfortunately, despite how much we care. And so now it's how do we talk about the issue and find other messengers and other reasons for people to ultimately support offshore wind, or whatever the issue you choose to work on is, despite the motivating factor of that behind it, which I suspect for you all is climate. You need to build leaders, right? So identifying tactics that not only build leaders, but allow them to be leading other people's, right? The resolutions, we identified leaders, they'd run a resolution campaign, they learn on those skills, and they help build other leaders. And execution is really important. Campaigns never lose because of lack of expertise. They lose from lack of execution. Always be organizing, show up, don't say no for others, right? Like, if you don't think there would be an ally, like ask them to see if they actually could be an ally. When you're thinking about recruitment, just ask someone. Like, your answer is always no. They'll never come to your event or go to do your thing if you never ask them. But if you ask them, it won't always be no. And friends and foes, operate as there's no permanent friends or permanent enemies, because you might agree on this issue with people that you might not agree on other issues. And so it's important to really be clear and respectful in how you operate in your campaigning, that like, we agree, like, just because we don't agree on everything doesn't mean we can't agree on anything and work together productively on that issue. And with that, I open it up for discussion and questions.
Thank you, Claire. Does anyone want to jump in with a question to kick us off? I know Tom and Bart, I see you there. I'm not sure if either of you are able to speak, but I'd love to know if you have any reactions from the offshore wind campaign and how things are going down in Newport. Diane, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I live in North Kingstown, and I guess we would say it's kind of a purple district. Right now, the whole town council is Democrats, but that's certainly no guarantee after November's election. And there's a group of people here in North Kingstown who've been getting together, and they decided that their tactic was going to be education. And so they organized a series of lectures called Climate Conversations. That's what they called it. And it's starting. They just had the first one last week. It's going to be 4 different lectures at the North Kingstown Library. Anyway, my question is, I would like to see like a resolution saying that all new construction in North Kingstown had to be electric ready. I mean, I really would like it just to say it needs to be electric, no more gas or oil. But it seems like the medium step is electric ready or something. But I don't know whether, from what you were saying, Claire, whether that's North Kingstown is a good place to do it, or that's a good place to start, or are we really looking for red districts to try to do that?
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to suggest that like the resolution was like a tactic that applies to the offshore your offshore wind case. I need to like educate myself a little bit more to have an opinion on like what the right tactic is. But before you even get to tactics, you have to like what are your goals, right? Like US 350, like what are your long-term goals? I know that the what is it called? Yes to wind is an intermediate is one of your intermediate goals. And then like what is your theory of change? Like if education is a tactic, like that might be good or not, but like how is education, like how is that going to lead into yes for wind? I don't know, but I think we have to like build out that strategy in order to identify whether it's a resolution, whether it's an education, whether it's constituent meetings, whether, I mean, right? Like the tactics can be, I mean, really creative. We did flyovers on beaches, right? Like with the plane, you know, but it wasn't until we actually had like a sound strategy that we were able to evaluate return on investments for a particular tactic.
Okay. I don't feel sophisticated enough to kind of know how to do that, how to think that way.
We can keep talking about it. Bart, do you want to jump in? Oh, I think we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Geez, am I in a commercial for Verizon?
I know, right?
I don't think so. So Claire, a fascinating collection of stuff. I mean, just really good. You know, it's nice to see these things in a big picture because it kind of helps separate the the leaves of today's discussion from the forest we have to get through. But yeah, we were in a slightly different situation, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. You know, your thoughts, and it's been one of mine for many of the other things I've been involved in, is the theory of change. But really, to some degree, we're winning. And the problem is that we know that the opposition is actually growing. And that's not a theory of change, that's a theory of preservation. So we've had Biden, who has been great, and
or your
Obama,
power
who has been great.
dynamics, right? Like if you won, your bubble is bigger. But if they're building their bubble, then your bubble might be shrinking. And so like, how are you going to make sure that you're still building your bubble so they don't have a chance?
Right. So that so how do we, like a lot of the people who you took as natural allies, we find that the opposition is now convincing to be, opposed to us, like fishermen and, whale preservationists and, a lot of other people who should not be there, in my view. They're now, coalescing behind their concerns. And so it's a very different dynamic. I mean, there's some interesting things there, but I'm wondering about how you think about that progress, because, BOEM has done a great job of kind of saying, they've opened up the universe of stuff to do, and our opponents, the net result of their work is that projects will eventually become unfeasible because of economics and because of litigation costs and because of other things. So it's a slightly different side of the coin, a lot of the same dynamics, but
I mean, they are doing our playbook.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
from this case
I saw
study,
a lot
right?
of your allies saying those are our guys too. Right.
Right. Like, so they cut the issue, right? They're trying to cut the issue in order to bring other allies in, like the whale people, and all this other stuff. So there's a couple things that you need to do. One is, I know the whale stuff. I worked with like there's literally more right whale researchers than there are in right whales, because they're so endangered. And I know probably half of them because it's only like 100, right? Like, you can do bubble netting. There is monitors. You could put in place ways so that you can't do construction during migration periods or what, right? Like, there's ways to address those things. BOEM did a great job of that early on. I should look at what happened. Maybe Trump gutted it. But so one, you got to address the opposition. If they're getting the momentum, you got to stop that before they, build up and overtake you, because offshore wind is also an industry, just like oil and gas. So they are going to have the invested interest for the long term. They're not just do-gooders like we are. So you got to get like the facts and figures right to address those, but I wouldn't also hyper focus on that, because then you're just like it might just be in like a messaging war of like, they say this and we say that, right? Like, and then you go back and forth. So you also are going to need a multi-pronged approach to identify like, what are the policies that are going to help make it more expensive for fossil fuels, right? Or whatever bad things, and cheaper for good things. And maybe that is what Diane said, like, or like county or city ordinances, right? Like, I don't know what the exact policy issues, but there could be a whole, like, what are all the policy things and a selection tool to identify those. But anyways, hopefully I started to answer your question, but I would need to know more information about your organization and what your goals are to have a more like robust opinion on, what your theory of change should be or could be.
It's really a theory of inertia of stasis, right? Rather than a theory of change, right? It's a theory of how do we preserve this good thing that we got against many people who are thinking that's, not in their interest. And, how do we, and one of the very difficult things that we have is that there are so many of their issues that are not, that you could just get distracted answering 53 falsehoods in the course of a 45-minute conversation. You're not going to do that, right?
I know.
So,
I mean, literally,
we
did a scientific integrity complaint as Oceana to the chief scientist at BOEM, because he was espousing oil and gas industry talking points when it came to seismic air gun blasting. So like you had to do that, but that was kind of behind the scenes, like getting our facts and figures straight. And we did that to then like actually at least be like, we filed a scientific integrity complaint. So it wasn't just the oil and industry saying, hey, BOEM said seismic blasting was good and whatever it might be. But I think also like, okay, fine. They're getting the like whale groups. They don't have power. Believe me, I come from a whale group. They do not have a ton of power. So fine. But who's going to benefit, right? Like thinking about the circles, like who is going to benefit from offshore wind? Where are the unions at? Where the fact that it's going to be reliable energy, where's your transmission at to reduce, costs to the end user, the small businesses, the large industry users, right? Like this will actually save people a ton of money forever, right? And so who are those people? Who are the decision makers? Who are their tier 2 targets, right? Like who do they listen to? And then what are the constituencies that are most important to them, and go after them. And you're just going to need your own equivalent to the whale people or the NIMBYs, right? Like you're going to have to build out your own non-traditional allies.
Different kind of battle. I appreciate your thoughts. It's great. It's helpful.
For what it's worth.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know a ton about your issue. I will have better, if I learn more, I am happy to come back and actually have more refined thinking.
I think we love that. Maybe one more question. Sorry, Tom, I cannot unmute you, but if anyone else wants to jump in. Barbara?
Yeah. So far, the most helpful thing that has been said is the most recent, that we need to promote what is an advantage to everybody, to the large number of people who are basically on the side of wanting this renewable energy, and just making more clear to them the advantages, the long-term, not just the climate change advantages, but
right.
Like Claire was saying, I think we just haven't made them visible enough yet. That would be where I hope we go.
Homegrown energy that can't be exported, right? Like these are all like the talking points for, you know, I maybe I could dig up those, right? My talking points from offshore wind that are still relevant today. Excuse my cat.
Yes, that would be helpful.
It's just to add on to Barbara's point. Green Energy had a thing on wind about 2 weeks ago. 57% of Rhode Islanders are in favor of offshore wind. So it's good to know that the public is generally behind it and sees the benefit of it. It's the kind of outliers that are saying it's killing whales, it's killing fish, it's killing those are the things that we need to.
Well, then think back at that slide about like you need and the tactics, right? You need a lot of people and a lot of people that care deeply, and then the right people. So like, great, you have 50% that are really with you, but like, where are the other 50%? And it's the whale people and whoever else that are care deeply and they're showing up to things and they're doing things. And so what is like, how are you going to counter that seesaw? So like they're doing all this stuff, like what are you going to do about it proactively to make sure that you keep, what did you call it? Perseverance? No. What did
preserving the inertia of stasis. Yeah,
inertia of stasis. Yeah.
The thing just to throw out, the thing I like that you said, Claire, is about being nimble, and that to keep thinking of new ideas, new approaches, even if it's all directed at the same goal. And I think we're trying to do that, but anyway.
Yeah, you guys are the most well positioned, right? Like small community groups have a tremendous amount of power if you could figure out how to unlock it, right? Curry Beach ended up being kind of like the narrative arc, right? Like all these big decision makers in DC, they know Mayor Emily Swearingen, right? Because she was coming up. And so I have a DC resident, I don't even vote, but I don't have any power for DC. But with community groups, when you're representing in the work that you guys are doing, it can make a huge difference in your state houses. You could be a case study for other communities, which is going to be needed because, offshore wind needs to expand all over, and people are watching what you guys are doing, especially, yeah. And how you're going to move it around and then get all the benefits from it. So if ever you want to talk about transmission, it's one of my new favorite issues to talk about.
Yeah, we do have the advantage that, the numbers can be small. As Megan Cotter, one of the candidates we mentioned, won by 34 votes. So we don't have to turn out so many people to make a difference.
And you have a C4, so it's like, think about smoking them out. I don't know if you've already done right? You have a C4?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like smoke them out, get people, elected officials on the record now, right? Like around your priority issues. So that way, if they get elected and they do the thing, you can say, great. And if they don't do the thing, you hold them accountable next year, right? Like sometimes you need to get people just like on the record, not just for offshore wind, which is like, it sounds like you're short, like your campaign now, but like, yes, offshore wind, but like, what is the other thing that you want, and articulate that, because this, you don't want to have to do this boom and bust cycle of like, okay, we're starting this issue, we're educating you from scratch, and we have to get everyone on. Like, you need to be able to create that umbrella, that arc of like where you want to go, so that when you go back to a community or go back to an organization to be like, okay, we asked you to sign this letter, but now we need to do this, and now we need to do this, right? Because you're in it for, like, if you're working on climate, you're in it for the long run. So offshore wind might be the top of the list right now, but in next year, in 2 years, it's going to be whatever your, policy set is. And so you need to provide that kind of connective tissue so that people understand like where it is you're going and why offshore wind is the most important issue now, and how it's going to help you when you win that to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Hey, I figured out how to get my audio on. Yeah, it's just nuances, of different, video. This session to me is truly enlightening, because I've been working with CARI since it got particularly active in the offshore wind like 9 months ago. I've been working on offshore wind, with Timmons and Barbara and some others for a year and a half. And we've been doing a lot of stuff, but it hasn't been organized really and thought out. There has been organization around particular actions, but the comprehensive organization hasn't been there. And I think this is phenomenal for us to get together and think out, what are we doing? What's worth it? I've been working very hard on educational perspectives, and you point out, Claire, that education is actually a lower order influence or lower order aspect to cause the net effect we want. So and I know we've got some actions going on, with Nick and with Christian and with, I have trouble with that woman's name, Joe. I'm not sure that I think they're working on communication strategy and tactics versus organizational strategy and tactics as well. So, in the old idea of like the kids' book Stone Soup, let's get those ingredients in the pot and really work up a great broth or composition to achieve our goal.
I love that you use that analogy, because I'm literally writing a campaign cookbook because I use the analogy of like, you can have all the greatest ingredients and be like, but if you're not a chef, you could burn your fancy Kobe beef while you're chopping your onions and still over salt it and have a bad meal, or like it's great that people are reading a communication strategy and all these other things, and that kind of naturally happens. But it sounds like you guys are at a point that you're mature enough that like, okay, you kind of know all the players. You need to get in a room and do a strategy session so that you're optimizing, like, what is our collective theory of change and how are we all as individuals and in organizations executing off of that and doing the tactics to explain why if we do X, Y, and Z, we're going to get this result.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a great note to wrap up on. And thanks for that, Tom. And I think that could be a great next step for the team, is to really map out, the Quonset City Council, like the pipeline, there's a cable coming there. Like, who are these decision makers, and maybe getting a bit more moving up from the education to these other levers. And it's hard because, as you said, Bart, like there's so much misinformation, and it's growing, and it's tempting to chase after all these and it's actually distracting because we're not sure what we're trying to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, they do that as a strategy, right? To like diffuse your resources. So it sounds like now more than ever, you need to like figure out what that balance is, putting out the fires versus starting your own.
I know we're just about done. So, but it might well be that, the lesson for us as a group is to focus on where this goes, right? Because where offshore wind goes is electrification of the state. And that's that's a battle we're having at the PUC. That's a battle we're having at a bunch of places where we say, all right, we have this potential of offshore wind, and the fruit of that is going to be that we'll have clean energy for everything, not just so that maybe the fact that we're winning this battle, maybe it helps us a little bit by pointing towards the larger goal, which is we want everything electric, and the only way we get there reasonably is with offshore wind. And then maybe that's aiming at a higher purpose is helpful in our particular circumstances. So,
from my point of view, doing a lot of strategy sessions, that is a great long-term goal. Fully electrified Rhode Island, intermediate goal. Offshore wind, short-term goal. It sounds like Caitlin was saying you have to power map, and you mentioned whatever, some of the details of like where the wires are going. Like, boom, you just finished like 1/5 of the work, like getting your goals in one place. Then you need to do your organizational considerations. the target, your power analysis, and then you do tactics. Like that comes last, because you need to be able to explain why are you doing that tactic at a particular time and what is the intended impact, and does it represent the highest and best use of your time and resources given your community group, right? Like you don't have full-time staff and all this other stuff. So it's not about doing good things. It's about what is the best thing I can do now, right? Like what is the most important thing that I can do now to have the biggest impact?
Love it. Thank you everyone for being here
Thank
and
you.
staying on. We really appreciate you all joining us, and huge thank you to Claire. Very informative and thought-provoking.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Especially at 9 o'clock at night after a full day. So if you have me back, hopefully it'll be earlier in the day so I'm not brain dead.
Yes, that would be great to continue the work. So thanks to everyone. Looking forward to the continuation of this, and stay tuned to hear more from Jeff and me.
Thank you for having me again. Keep up the great work. Bye.
You too.